we will not found wanting of any rule of floating the route. So today webinar, if I'm correct, today webinar is being transmitted live on Mira's YouTube page as usual. We'll be able to share the recording with you after the event is complete, usually via the web YouTube page. So you can please visit the Mira's YouTube page on youtube.com/Mira. We welcome all you to revisit the content yourself and share with your colleague. Please, all participants are required to mute their microphones and possibly turn off their videos while the presentation is ongoing, because this will help us to manage our bandwidth. Some of us are on MTN network, some of us are on Glo. So for us to manage our bandwidth, we plead that people should turn off their video. Um, we also we
my
also
comment.
Come again, please. Okay. We also invite your comments and questions. Please look at the Q&A chat box. You can drop on your screen, you can drop your questions for the speaker at any point. Just type in there and I will collate all questions and hold them for the interaction or for Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Participants are only expected to unmute their mic while making contribution. As we can see from the screen, today's facilitator is no other person than Dr. Saheed Olaide Jimoh, who we are. Let me see. I think he's online now. Can you confirm, Dr. Zainab?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Thank you, sir. We've been waiting for you. Anyway, Alhamdulillah, the guest speaker is around, so I can read out his short biography. Dr. Jimoh Olaide, Saheed Jimoh, he has his bachelor degree in Bachelor of Agriculture in Pasture and Range Management and Masters in Agriculture in Pasture and Management, Pasture Production and Utilization from the University of Agriculture, Abeokuta, FUNAB. He later completed his PhD in Utilization and Conservation of Grassland Resources at the Institute of Grassland, Graduate School of Chinese Academy of Sciences of Agricultural Sciences, Beijing, China. Dr. Jimoh is a plant ecologist with research interests in below-ground ecology of grassland and forest, ecosystem ecology, functional ecology, sustainable agriculture, and the impact of climate change on plant species. Allah has made it possible for him to author over 30 journal articles, one book chapter, one book review. His work has appeared in leading journals such as the Proceeding of the National Academy of Sciences, PNAS, Journal of Ecology, BMC Biology, and Bioscience. He collaborates actively on global research projects focused on ecology of grassland. Dr. Jimoh also brings approximately 5 years of editorial experience as an associate editor for the African Journal of Range and Forage Science, and currently serves as subject matter editor for Ecosphere, an open access journal of the Ecological Society of America. It is my singular honor to invite Dr. Saheed Olaide Jimoh, and I'm glad to hand over the floor to the facilitator who will be discussing with us navigating publishing in high impact journal. Bismillah.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Good morning,
Good afternoon and good evening, everyone, from whatever we're joining. Um, Let me try to open my video and also share my screen. Okay, I need permission to share screen, please. Can you allow me to share screen, please?
I'm coming. I will do that shortly.
Also, when you are done with that, it looks like some people are also in the waiting room getting some personal messages regarding that. Okay. Uh,
I think you can share now.
okay, I'm trying to do that actually. All right, so please, can you see my screen? It's
Yes.
showing like an email, right?
Yes.
Okay. Coming. Okay. How about now? Is it showing the slide now, please?
Yes, it is.
Right. Yeah, good morning, everyone, once again. And I want to thank you for joining the session. And I also want to appreciate Mira for finding me worthy to discuss the topic of today. So today we'll be talking about navigating publishing in high impact journals. We'll talk about strategies, pitfalls, and some success stories to kind of inspire um, inspire ourselves to make sure we are able to push forward our work to be published in some of the leading journals in our various fields. And I also apologize for slightly coming late. I have to leave my house to be able to join the session in my office, so it can be much more conducive for me, even though it's on the sun. So I apologize for that. All right, let's dive into the presentation proper. Um, I do not need to go over this slide again because the moderator already talked about that. So, but for today, our agenda for the meeting is as shown above. So we'll be looking at why this topic matters, what are our impact factors, how do we define them, and what are the strategies, we can use and what are the strategies we can use to, get our work published in high impact journals. And finally, we'll look at some takeaways. So firstly, why does this topic matters? Have you ever had the opportunity, to conduct a very great study, but you keep wondering, like, where should you submit your work? I'm very sure some of us must have found ourselves in this situation. And, in the world of publishing today, there are a lot of, publishing outlets that are very fake, that will always hunt you to bring your work for them to publish. And, it becomes, kind of throw you into confusion, like, so where do I submit my work now? This journal A or this journal B? However, if our interest is to publish in reputable journals where our work will be able to reach a large, number of audience and also make the intended impact, then it's always good for us to consider very good journals to publish our work. So in this context, this topic matters because there's increasing competition for space in top tier journals now. And I'm going to justify this by showing a little bit of statistics here. Right. They are not considered for publication, only 8. So you can imagine how fierce that kind of competition is, which simply implies that any work that is going to get into that publication outlet must be very sound and have a very huge potential to make meaningful impact. If we also look at Pinas is also another very impactful journal. They are still a bit more generous And this statistic is showing that for every 100 papers submitted to PNAS, only 14 are accepted for publication. That's also a very tall order, which simply implies that around 86 papers will just be rejected that way. But interestingly, rejection is part of the process, and we'll talk about that shortly as we move on. Now, but against all these background, it's also important that we don't give up as researchers. We still need to put in our efforts to make sure that we are able to publish our work in high reputable journals in our field. However, one important of this publication type is that it has the possibility to help us improve our career. It can have a very big impact on our career trajectory. Now, imagine yourself as a PhD student being able to publish in, let's say, Science or PNAS or any of these very big journals, at least in your field. It really shows that you must have become, an expert in that field. As a result of that, there's possibly a lot of, collaboration that comes your way. If you're trying to apply for funding, you can, easily point to those kind of publications. People can actually reach out to you and be like, hey, can we collaborate? So publishing your work in high impact journals have a very huge impact on the career. However, one caveat is that it is not possible that all the research you are going to conduct in your life will always be published in, for example, Science or Nature or PNAS. So it simply implies that it depends on you, to be able to identify that, okay, this particular study, is worth actually going to a very big journal, and you have to dedicate your time, to make the writing in a way that it's suitable for, that kind of top journal. So briefly, what do we refer to as high impact journals? When we say high impact journals, what do we mean? Well, impact is not just about numbers, actually. It also relates to, how many people the journal is able to reach, what is the relevance, what is the reputation of that journal, who are those reading the journal. Is it only being read by scientists alone, or you have policymakers also, looking for information from those kind of journals? However, general one general index that we use is the impact factor. It is the most common index we use that is used to rank journals, in the present day in the publishing industry. And these journals also have very high citation rates. They have very, very, very high citation rates. You're talking about journals with impact factor. Even any journal you see from, let's say impact factor of 5 and above, it's not really easy to attain that kind of impact factor. So these are journals that have very high citation rate. Then they also have very high rejection rate, as we have shown in the previous slide. For every number of people they receive, they reject a large portion of them, which simply implies that they have a review and editorial standard that is very, high. In some instances, you see these kind of journals, having editorial board that are, specifically hired for that job, like full-time editorial staff that are able to pay, 100% attention to what kind of journal or what kind of article are we going to be accepting. Now we know what these impact journals are, high impact journals are. They are basically journals that when you publish in them, your work have, higher chances of being read by a lot of people. Your work have a higher chances of, probably being cited because of the feasibility those kind of journals have. Now, if we want to try to publish in those kind of journals, what are the things we need to do? So that takes us into the strategic high impact publishing tips. If you have ever conducted a study and you're at the stage where you start considering, okay, where do I publish my work? Then you need to ask yourself some of these questions. Number one is that, have you done something that is new? Look inward within yourself. The research you have conducted, is it a research that is, adding new knowledge in your field, or you are only repeating what has been done before? Now, let's take two scenarios here. Let's say I've conducted two studies. In one of them, I actually did something that is, totally new, generating a new knowledge in the field. And in the other study, I only replicated, let's say, a study that has been conducted by Zainab in the first instance, also a study that has been conducted by Karim. But I'm now doing a validation study to show that, yes, what they have actually found is correct. So in those instances, please, can you respond in the chat box? Which of these kind of study do you think should be pushed for a high impact publication? Is it the study that generates new knowledge or the one that is trying to validate previous findings? Looking forward to your responses, please. Okay, good. All right. I'm seeing some nice responses. Okay. So now we all agree that the one that we are going to consider for push to high impact dollar is the one that generates new knowledge. That is good. Now, in generating new knowledge as well, you also need to ask yourself, is that study, challenging the status quo? Let us say, for instance, there has been a lot of studies saying that, the relationship between height and weight of kids, depending on the amount of food you are giving them, is going to be positive. Maybe that is what is replete in the literature. But you have conducted your own study and you find something that is opposite. That means that you are challenging the status quo of what is already existing. Those kind of studies can be very interesting to push, for publication in high impact factors journals, because you do need to do your homework to make sure that you have a very good explanation for the results that you have found and why your result is actually deviating from the status quo. Next is that you ask yourself, will your result influence other researchers? For example, if you have generated a new knowledge, then there's every chances that there are other researchers that will also want to validate your own new knowledge that you have generated, because people will not just feel like, yes, you have done something new, yes, but this needs to be further validated by other people as well. And lastly, is your research robust? The kind of data set you have will also sometimes it determines whether you are able to push your work for publication in high impact journals or not. For example, if you participated in a study that has replicated study sites across the world, which is global in scale, right? Versus only a study that looks at a local context, in just one site in a particular maybe local government or region or state in a country. Those two kind of data sets are also different. So in that situation, you would also want to push the one that have a bigger data set, for high impact publication. And if you have ever looked at some of these high impact publications, you see that most of the time they just focus on the main, take home message. The writing is not usually very verbose. But you will see that the amount of data they are presenting is very, voluminous. And that is to tell you that, one of the things that can also help to be able to publish in high impact factor journals is to have a robust, data set. Then the methodology you have used also is also very important. Are you using a robust methodology, or you are just using a very simple analytical approach? So if you are able to answer yes to all these questions, then you are good to go. You have ticked all the boxes. Then it's time for you to start preparing your manuscripts to make sure that you are able to submit to some of these journals. And that takes us to the next level, which is crafting a strong manuscript for publication in this type of journals. So what do you need to do? The first thing is that you need to make sure that your title is engaging. An engaging title is very important, because that is the first thing, even after you submit your work to the journal, that's the first thing the editor will probably see. Like, okay, what is this title? From the title, people should be able to have an idea of what is going on in your work. What have you done? What have you found out? So the title needs to be very engaging. And editors are gatekeepers of science. So if you have a very good title, that can actually interest them to be like, yes, I need to look at this paper a little bit further to see what is inside of it. Secondly, is that you need to write your abstract in a very succinct way. If you look at the one I'm projecting on the screen, this abstract is probably not more than 150 words. Now, you would agree with me that if you spent like, let's say, minimum of 3 months conducting research, and now you want to summarize everything in just 150 words, it is not something that is going to be easy. And that is why this is something that you have to, practice over time. And you also probably want to invite, peer review from your colleagues to help you look at it, whether it is, really clear and quite understandable. Because once people are interested in the title of your paper. And then the next thing is to go further and look at the abstract and see what exactly is done. And I'll give a typical example here. For example, if I'm trying to conduct a meta-analysis and I'm trying to search for papers, once I screen with title first, the next thing is to screen with what? With the abstract, because the abstract should give me an idea of did these authors report the type of variables I'm interested in. If yes or no, then that will determine whether it's going to be included or not. So next is that you need a clear and well-articulated research question or hypothesis. This is very important, especially if you want your work to be considered in high-impact journals. And one of the things why this is important is that you need to be acquainted with the leading edge of research in your field, because that is only when you'll be able to craft a research question or hypothesis that will really align it with whatever is ongoing in your research area, which will also show that you are conversant with the literature in your field. So your research question or hypothesis is something that is very important. It has to be clear and well articulated. Sometimes other authors have a very good research, but they are not able to communicate what exactly is the question they are asking in their in their research, and that can actually be a source of rejection. So in essence, your hypothesis or questions should be specific and focused. It should be testable and measurable. It should be something that we all, as we see the question, we know that okay, yes, this is something we can test. Then it has to be grounded in theory or literature. Yes, because you probably are not the only, you are not the first person that will be working in that field. You understand? So you have to really, provide some background context, and that is in your introduction. That will really show how you arrive at your, research question in a very, nice and logical sequence. Then it has to be relevant and significant. Relevant in the sense that is it going to add new knowledge to your field? If it's not going to add a new knowledge to your field, it's probably not, maybe might not be considered for, publication in high impact journals. Of course, you can still find a space in, other type of journals, probably if it's only validating, previous research. So it has to be that it's adding a new knowledge. For example, the context might be different. Maybe some, earlier studies are focused on doing the research on a regional level. Maybe you are taking your own to the national or global level, that's an addition to knowledge, for example. Clear and concise, I already kind of mentioned that. So once you move from the title to abstract to writing a very good hypothesis, of course, which will be under your introduction, then how did you present your result is very important. Nowadays, research publishing is moving away from the use of tables. I remember at least around like 2013, 14, when I was still doing my first degree, I don't think I ever even used the figure to present my work. But nowadays, if you really want people to be able to glean value from the output of your findings, then you will use, figure instead of table, at least where it is possible. And one of the advantage of this is that even when people look at your papers, for example, I am kind of surfing the net. I found your paper. I think the title is nice. Okay, fine. Okay, the abstract also look interesting. The next thing is for me to go and look at your figures, because from your figures, I can easily identify what are the findings from your study. And that will really help me to know what else should I, look for in your paper. For example, it will probably take me 1.5 hours or less, to read one full paper, depending on the number of, pages. But if I'm able to get some of this information directly, from your figures, then it makes it easy. For example, if you look at the figures on the screen, the figures are clear for us to see. The first one on the left is showing a PCA result, while the second one is actually showing us a kind of regression result, showing relationship between two different variables. So this kind of thing, when you are able to present your result in this way, then it makes it easy for whoever is trying to read your paper to be able to glean value from your paper and be able to understand them. So how do you write an effective results section? Because if you want to publish in a high impact journal, how you present your result actually matters a lot. It is very, very important. And one of the ways to do this is that, number one, the result section should be clear, easy to understand. Now, whatever new findings you are coming up with or new knowledge you are generating, you have to make sure that this is clearly pointed out with the statistics to back it up. Now, to do this better, present the novel findings under a separate subtitle. If you have generated a new knowledge, make sure you give it a separate, title. I mean a subtitle. It makes it more attractive. It makes it more easily identifiable. And you can duplicate the same for the figure legend so that, people can easily correspond the data that you are reporting for that new knowledge, with the text in the writing. Then integrate your results with discussion, ensuring that the two correspond. And this, largely depends on the formatting of the journal. So in some journals, I know in social sciences, there are people are allowed to, combine results and discussion, but in sciences, you have to write them, differently. But whatever the case may be, just make sure that the data you are reporting is not outside the scope of what you have in your work. I've seen instances or review papers where authors would be reporting or talking about things that they did not measure in their study. That is a red flag. Whatever you don't mention, you don't measure in your study, you don't report it. Even if you want to speculate about it, you need to make it clear that you are only speculating. All right. Yeah. So this takes us to the next concept I'm going to discuss, which is the concept of less is more. If you really want to publish your work in high impact journals, then you have to cultivate the habit of less is more. And what does this less is more concept implies? It means that when you try to communicate, okay, firstly, let me talk about attention span. Attention span it means that people are spending less time in reading papers these days. So if people are spending less time in engaging with papers, you want to make sure that whatever you are presenting is presented in a very direct way that is easy for people to understand. And this is where the concept of less is more comes in. One, you need to get straight to the point. You don't have to start perambulating, trying to use, larger number of words that would probably eventually throw your readers into confusion. If you pick up a nature paper, you will see that even the method section is pushed to the last part of the paper. What you will see them reporting is the abstract, the introduction. From the introduction, they go to the results because they know that that is probably what people need to know about. Then after the result, you have the discussion. Then they will now go back to the methodology. I do agree that that is the format that they have chosen. But if you look at that sequence, it really allows them to be able to, present the work in a way that what actually matters is what they push forward. So the concept of less is more implies that when you write your paper, you have to make sure you are able to condense, the number of words you have without losing the meaning. This is something that requires time to, become expertise in. It's not something that you just wake up one day and you become an expert in. No, but it has to go through several rounds of editing for you to arrive at that place. So don't be angry with yourself. First draft is always very, rough. But you need to bear it in mind that if you want to
Ya
really
Abdul, mama na kiran ka.
apply the concept of less is more, then you must be ready to edit your work in several rounds. Then when you use the concept of less is more, it simply implies that you are saving your readers time and energy. We would see some of these examples as I progress. It means that you are saving your readers time and energy to read your work. And that would really make them appreciate you. Then it helps you to communicate in a more clearer and effective way. It helps you when you streamline your sentences. However, it doesn't mean that all the sentences in your paper has to be very short sentences, but there must be nuances. But what we are trying to say here is that even the idea that there is competition for space in these journals would actually force you down, to consider the concept of less is more. Like, for example, I have a paper I'm preparing presently, and I think the maximum number of words allowed by that journal is 5,000 words. So you can imagine if you want to report the different sections of the paper using 5,000 words, that is something that is going to be, tedious to do, but it is achievable. You just need to, be dedicated and be determined on how to do it and go through several rounds of, editing. Now let's quickly look at some common writing pitfalls that people tend to have. The first one is poor structure. The way you structure your sentences is actually very important. Let's take an example here. This example is saying the study area was in a temperate region. We collected soil samples every month. The samples were analyzed using spectrometry. Our main goal was to understand nutrient cycling. This looks like a sentence fragment. If you write this way, there's every likelihood that, high-ranked journals would probably not, consider your work worthy of, consideration, because it simply implies that you are not able to condense the information. And instead, there are other different ways where you can write this particular content that will be more direct, and you are going to use fewer number of words. But let's look at one of them. To understand nutrient cycling, we collected monthly soil samples from a temperate region and analyzed them using spectrometry. You can see that the same information in the first one is the same information in the second one. But in the second one, we are able to condense the information. So this is one of the things that has to do with the concept of less is more. You understand? Although it's not a bad idea that you have the first one in your first draft, but in the process of revision, you need to put that in mind, that you have to find a way to condense, information in your paper. One of the second issues is overloading readers with jargon or passive voice. It's always good that when you write your academic papers, you write them in active voice. It makes it easy for readers to understand, and it also helps your communication. However, of course, there are some certain terms that are relevant to different fields, but you don't want to, overly bother, your readers with a lot too much of jargon, especially if your work is interdisciplinary. Because if your work is interdisciplinary, you need to consider that, probably other people in the other field might not be too much acquainted with the jargons in your own field. So you want to try to reduce it to the barest, minimum. And let's see an example of this. Our results showed a very significant and extremely important increase in plant biomass. Can somebody please use the chat box to tell us what seems wrong in this sentence? Like, if you were to revise this sentence, what is the thing you are going to try to erase from the sentence? Let's see one or two responses, please. Our results showed a very significant and extremely important increase in plant biomass. Extremely, yes, I agree. Thank you, Ademola Adedeji. I'll take that up, but there's still more. Extremely important. Thank you. Thank you, Shu 2000. Very significant. Yeah, it looks like somebody's going to take away our results. Great. That would be that would change the way it is being presented. Good. Significant and extremely important and like repetition. Thank you, Ayomide Adele. All right. These are all very good. Plant biomass. We might not be able to take away plant biomass because that is what we are reporting about. But let's see what one possible alternative way of writing this. Our results revealed a surge in plant biomass, and this is saying the same thing as the first sentence. We're only trying to say that after we finish this experiment, we noticed that the plant biomass increased. So there's no need for using very significant and extremely important. Yes, like somebody posted in the chat box, the two are like repetition. So you want to guide against some of these things. And trust me, it's possible that you yourself might not be able to see these things. Because sometimes when you write yourself, there are some little mistakes that you will not be able to see by yourself. So to help avoid, falling into this kind of trap, it's always good that when you finish writing your manuscript, you look for a colleague that can help you review the work. So when you give it to an external person to help you review the work, some of the mistakes you are not able to see, those kind of colleagues can actually see it. Now, there's a little bit of, caveat around this. If you are giving the work to somebody else to review, if the person is only trying to help you review grammar, no any intellectual contribution, it is okay to just acknowledge the person in the acknowledgement section. However, if you are willing to get this kind of favor from colleagues, you should also be ready to provide the same type of favor, for others as well. Yeah, weak or missing literature framing is another issue, that can actually be fatal when you are considering publishing your work in high impact journal. And what do I mean by this? Let us look at this sentence. It says people eat different foods in different places. Some studies have looked at diet and culture. Now, if you look at this sentence, it appears too general one. It doesn't really, highlight any research gap or it does not really engage with, previous literature. So we need to avoid, things like this. And this is where context matters. When you are framing the literature, you want to frame it in a way that clearly shows that you understand the literature. And one of the issues that causes this is when we don't take our time to read. Because if you don't read, there's no way you want to glean value from any article. So we need to invest our time in reading because when we read, we tend to understand the literature well. So when it comes to writing, it makes it easy for us to, use our thoughts to express whatever we have read. So one possible way to correct this is to say while previous research has shown that cultural norms shape dietary patterns, few studies have examined how globalization is altering traditional food consumption in urban African context. This study explores that transformation using a comparative approach. You see that here, besides referring to a specific study, it also identifies a clear knowledge gap that the current study is trying to fill. So this is how one of the good ways for us to, kind of frame the literature, because the essence of framing the literature is to show that we know about what has been done in past, and we are able to bring that into the context of why what we want to do presently is important. One of the other issues we need to look at is ambiguous conclusions. You have conducted your research, you have very good findings, but I've reviewed papers as well where authors will reach conclusions that is very far away from the content of their paper. In that instance, it becomes a red flag. Like you should not even talk about whatever you did not measure in your experiment or in your research. Don't mention it at all, let alone bringing it into the picture in your conclusion. Let's look at this. Our results show some differences in food consumption patterns, which may be important and suggest areas for further investigation. Some differences, you did not quantify it. And I believe that even if you are using the descriptive statistics, you probably have some values to report. So this is not exact. It looks vague. Excuse me. There's no specificity and there's probably nothing for the reader to take away from here. Now, let's look at an alternative. Our findings reveal a significant shift from traditional grains to processed foods among urban households, indicating the growing influence of global dietary norms on food consumption. This trend has implications for nutrition policy and cultural preservation efforts in sub-Saharan Africa. If we look at this, this is more specific and interpretable, and it connects the findings from that study to a broader implication. What is that broader implication? It is the nutrition policy, because nutrition policy will depend on what is the food consumption patterns. I'm sure people in economics will be able to relate more with this, but I also come from an agric background, so it makes it easy for me to use this kind of example. Now, next, let's look at choosing the right journal. Now you have been able to craft your paper, you've written it from, title up to down to the conclusion. Now you need to choose the journal. Number one is that you need to be conversant with what is the scope of that journal. What is the aims and scope? You cannot be an agricultural economist and you are submitting your work to a journal that is, more focused on maybe let's say engineering or something. That's too far off. However, there are journals nowadays that are multidisciplinary in nature. So you also want to be sure that even if your journal is multidisciplinary, does it cover your area of study? So, and you have to invest time to read the journal's aim and scope to be sure that your paper actually falls within. Because if not, the paper is going to be desk rejected. Immediately the editor sees it and be like, no, this is out of the scope of our journal. They will just, reject the paper. And it usually comes back with frustration. There's no way your paper will get rejected and you will not feel, some level of frustration within yourself. So to prevent that, read the journal aims and scope. Secondly, check recent articles for thematic alignment. You can also check some of these articles that have been published recently in the journal, maybe in the last 2 or 3 years, to see the kind of publications, in that journal. Does it resonate with the kind of, information in your own article? And that would really increase your confidence that, yes, my paper or my article is a good fit for this journal before you actually proceed to submission. You can also use journal finder tools. I'm sure Elsevier has one, Springer, Taylor, and Francis. Other publishers may also have, but I'm not aware of that. But what I'm trying to say here is that, for example, if you are considering an Elsevier journal, you can use their journal finder tool. If you just go to Google and type journal finder plus Elsevier, it will only ask you for the abstract, I think, and title of your paper. Then it gives you journal suggestions. However, that is only a broad suggestion. So you need to, invest time and look into those journals, critically to see, whether their scope actually aligns. It will, it's an AI thing. It will just kind of use the information you abstract to suggest some journals to you. And don't be surprised that some of the journals to be suggested will be off the track actually. Yeah, reverse searching of references. This simply implies that after you publish some of your work. Let's say I published a paper in 2024 now. Now I'm trying to conduct a new study. So I can now go to Google Scholar and see which journals have cited my work. If I look at the journals that have cited my work, it helps me to, kind of understand what are the, new developments that I also need to focus on as a result of that work. And once I'm able to now work on those new developments, it makes it easy for me to now identify which of those journals that have cited my work that I can consider, provided they are high impact factor journals as I intended, and provided I also intend for that, new work for for publication in high impact journal. So that's reverse, searching of the references. Now, you have gone through all these processes and now you are ready to submit your paper. What are you supposed to do? Number one is that the first thing the editor will see, you know, depending on the editor anyway. But one of the things that they will see first is your cover letter. They want to see, that is where you have to sell yourself. It's like a marketing document for you. So start your cover letter by highlighting how does your paper, journal fit within the scope of the journal. Now provide a background information about your research, what question you have addressed, what findings, are emanating from your work, and what are the implications of that, findings. So if you're able to do that, most likely, you're provided there's a synergy between what is in your, cover letter and the content of your paper might be likely, considered. However, it's not always a roller coaster that way. I recently contributed to a global, project where we looked at some study about grassland on a global scale. And, even though we sent a pre-submission to this journal ahead of time and they said, yes, we should, submit the paper. The paper was dated. So that is to tell you that there's no one size way, but you just have to do your own part to be sure that you have done due diligence. Secondly, you have to follow the author guidelines. Excuse me. For example, if they want you to write figures in your paper as FIG dots, and you write everything in like figures 1 complete, then that is out of sync with the author guidelines. So that can also lead to desk rejection of your paper. So you want to be sure that you follow the author guidelines to the letter. And some of these things also, when you are submitting, they will ask you for how many number of words you have in your paper, the number of figures you have, the number of tables. You need to report all these things, all these metadata correctly. Failure to do so can actually lead to rejection of paper. Ethical consideration is also important in terms of authorship, in terms of plagiarism, data integrity. So you want to make sure, and that is why you have to, I think, is it not in the declaration section? I forget what the name, where we always say, like, we don't have conflict of interest and things like that, because this authorship of a thing is also very important. All authors must be, in agreement that they are, they consent to submitting the paper and other things related to that. Now, after submitting your paper, you just click this. After you click the submit button, then it is transferred to the journal. So what happens next? It goes to editorial consideration. Now, the editor would need to, scrutinize your paper first for, novelty and originality. Novelty is what is the information you are bringing on board? What new knowledge are you adding to the field? Originality is, did you actually conduct an original study, or it's just a repetition? So the editor would try to look into this. Secondly, is do you have a clear research question and hypothesis? What is the question you are addressing? Is that question clear? If it's not clear enough, it can actually lead to rejection. And don't forget that we mentioned in the beginning that some of these journals only accept, let's say, 8, 10, or 20 papers for every 100 papers that is submitted. And that is why they would not want to give chance to any slight mistake, because they will be like, rather than giving you a chance for these small mistakes, why not just consider other articles that actually did that have done the right thing all through. You understand? So it's always like a trade-off. So they'll just prefer to push your paper back to you and be like, let me move on to the next one. The methodology you have reported, is it rigorous and appropriate? Have you used the correct method to study the subject? So they would want to look into that. Then, do you have a strong narrative and implications in your study? They will also look into that to now decide whether to desk reject or send your paper for review. Now, once they send your paper for review, there are a lot of processes that goes on here, which we might not have time to go into in details. But your work will move from submission to quality check, editor assessment. Chief editor will look at it, assign it to subject editor. Then it goes out for review. Let's assume it is found worthy. The reviewers review it and get it back. And at that point, it's either of these three options on the last part of this picture you're seeing. It's either your paper is accepted the way it is or rejected, or you are asked to undergo some revisions. However, as tedious as this process looks like, it's important to let us know that resilience is very important. And I'm very sure that as a researcher, every one of us must have experienced this rejection at one point or the other. So one way you can actually destroy rejection is for you to be resilient. And sometimes you even get an overwhelming comment from reviewers. It happened to me during my PhD, where I got this voluminous reviewer comment, and you just be like, where do I start from? So if it happens like that, just take a break for a while and come back to it. Just start small. Before you know it, gradually you'll be able to address all the comments. Your choice of publication, whether in open access or traditional publishing. Open access implies that you are paying a certain amount of fee called the APC, or traditional means you transfer the copyright to the journal, and the journal is going to only show your paper to subscribers only. So that largely depends on whether you have research funders and what is their policy about publication, or whether the APC is free. There are some journals like that you can still publish in them with free APC. Then it also depends. You can also choose these options based on who are the audience you're trying to reach. So very briefly, well, I've had a very not very smooth publication journey, but it has been filled with a lot of experiences. For example, the paper on the top right actually went through rejection for like more than 10 times in different journals, and that was my first PhD paper before I was able to get it published. And that is also speaking to the idea of resilience is very important. Yeah, this is one of my PNAS papers that I've been able to publish. And recently I also contributed to a very global study that is really generating a lot of discussion within the scientific community, which focuses on how people can analyze the same data set but also arrive at different conclusions. Now, but let's quickly look at concerning this. Even though we're trying to publish our work in high impact journals, please don't do salami slicing or duplicate publication. Salami slicing simply implies that you have conducted a whole study, but you decided to be like, I'm going to publish 10 papers from this, from this work. Now you decide to be like, no, just one table or two tables is enough for one paper. You'll agree with me, Matt, that that kind of work is not going to fly in a high impact journal. So it's actually better for you to, have considerable amount of data and get the work published in a very good journal where it can have, better visibility. Duplicate publication is, submitting your work to two different, journals at the same time. That is something that is highly unethical. Then avoid predatory journals as much as possible. Tell you that, yes, bring your work, we'll publish it maybe in 1 week. I almost ran into this issue immediately I published my first. Elsevier journal identified that it's a predatory journal, and I, read the paper before they even, get it published. So you need to be aware of your colleagues in your field that do they know these journals. However, there are some new journals that you might try to do your research, ask your colleagues about them, look at the editorial board. Are they people of, that publication record is also important, like try to publish in a particular theme, at least a large number of people, so people will be able to identify you as an expert area. So to be able to give you a better chance of publishing in high impact journals, please work in a team. Working in a team is very important because you have different and diverse, number of people, being able to work together. So it helps you produce high quality research papers. Um, and working alone can be, and everybody contributing to, kind of point this out, that rather than competing, it's better we, focus more on collaboration, which is the way, and will be very helpful to publish, in high impact journals. All right, we're nearing the end. If you are here to publish in a high impact journal in your field and you think your research findings might have a chance, please don't be afraid to try. But be aware that it's 50-50 thing. So whichever way it goes, it's fine. If your paper is not accepted eventually, try. There are chances that you will get suggestions and comments that could help improve your paper before you turn it into another journal. So our final takeaway for this presentation is that number one, publish with purpose, not with pressure. Don't wait until you need a paper before you publish, especially for some of us, in low income countries where we kind of depend on, we have to publish for us to get promotion. So don't be in the habit of, you have to wait until your promotion is around the corner before you start planning publication. It will only lead to fatigue, a lot of frustration, especially if you have to be rejected in several journals. Align your work with journal goals. You can actually make sure this happens by looking at the journal scope and the author guidelines. And finally, be persistent and strategic about your work. Persistency is something that is very important, and that also relates to the idea of being resilient to achieve, your goals and aspirations with regard to publishing in high impact journals. And with this, I've come to the end of the presentation, and I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Saheed, and many thanks for that beautiful presentation. I mean, a lot was said and a lot for us to learn from. And it is good to learn particularly about this topic from someone who is also an editor, because when we are talking about review process and all these things, the best set of people that I can learn from are people who are at the back end of decision making. And thank you so much once again. And I will appreciate all our participants who have joined us from the beginning and those that join us in the middle or towards the end of the presentation. Like I've said at the beginning, if you have questions, please put it in the chat, or you can raise up your hand, then we can be taking the question one after the other. And while we are waiting for a question, I want to ask two questions. And the first question I want to ask is, so I want to adapt it from a book called Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, or something like that, Steve Covey or something who wrote the book. So which is talking about beginning, let me begin with the end in mind. Now, what can you say, or how can you explain this word in the context of publishing? To begin with the end, to begin with the end in mind. Now, the reason why I'm saying I asked this question is that a lot of people, when they are writing paper, some of us, we don't think about where we want to publish, which I think is a key factor. So you are a professional, you can shed more light on that. So let me let you speak about that first. Thanks.
I think that's a very good idea. And I will give two instances where these have actually kind of worked out for me. When I was the master's degree in 2017, my research, one of my supervisors actually told me, like, we're going to publish this work in animal behavior science. But a young researcher then, naive, no experience, I didn't really understand what it meant actually. But that speaks to the idea of having the end in mind, when you already start the experiment. For him, from his experience, he has been able to picture that, okay, the nature of this work we want to do will be a very good fit for this journal, which is a good journal. You get, and he actually helped me to pursue that dream. And eventually that is where the paper was, published eventually. In fact, that's the only journal we submitted the paper to, and they considered it, and it was published. Now, secondly, again, in my present position as a postdoc, I was about to start writing a paper when, after, doing some preliminary work, so my advisor was like, we're going to publish this work in this particular journal. Like, how do you feel, seeing this paper, or like, where do you see this paper, getting published? And I was quick to answer, like, yes, I've seen a similar paper in this particular journal. I think we should, consider it. And interestingly, that's a very tall order journal in our field. But we were like, yes, the work is actually good. The analysis is great. We should consider it. You understand that? Although I'm still on that one now, I've not, kind of finished working on it. So it's always good, like when you want to start the experiment, try to visualize where you see the work being published. I think that is something that is very good, because it really helps you to have the energy. One of the advantage of that is that it will really help you to focus on collecting a qualitative data, because you already prepared your mind that you want to publish that work in a very good outlet where it is going to make impact. So it will really allow you to pay much more attention to the process of the experiment, the data collection, how you are going to analyze your data. Even if eventually you did not get the paper published in that journal, you understand, but it will have, really helped you in the process as well. And it's also a way of, setting a goal for yourself. So I think that is something that is very important. I imagine you, preparing your mind to publish in that kind of high rank journal, and preparing your mind to be like, I'll just submit it anywhere, any journal that just comes my way. The effort you are going to put to those two instances is actually likely to be different. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for that beautiful response. That's cool, so insightful. Um, we still have, so inshallah we'll close the session by 8:45, inshallah. So we can still take a few questions. If you have questions, you can raise a hand, and okay, the first person, this is a professor, he's just using his name, Tunde Olase. So I'm happy to give the mic to Dr. Tunde Olasege, Ozil. Please ask a question, please.
Yeah, thank you very much for the wonderful presentation, sir. My question is, how do you balance, you want to be clear, you want to improve clarity, probably your first draft. I usually find myself in this kind of situation. And improving clarity sometimes increase the number of words in your manuscript, maybe in the first draft. So how do you balance the trade-off between clarity and having at least a considerable number of words in your manuscript? And because I find myself find it very difficult to maybe cut off some part of my write-up until someone has to help me.
Yeah, I think that is something we all go through at some point. Honestly, being able to write in a very concise way is something that is, very important in academia, but not something that is easy to come by, you know. And I think one of the approaches you can actually use is that you always have to have it at the back of your mind that you need to cut down you want to cut down the number of words, but you want to improve clarity. Now, to do that, it simply implies that you have to pay attention to every sentence. You're not going to take your eye, off any sentence that, assuming that no, this one is not important. No, you have to read, in a way that your intention is like you want to reduce this from 4,000 maybe to 3,000. Do you understand? So I think it's not advisable to go straight from that 4,000 to 3,000. You can first like aim for, okay, from 4,000 let's go to 3,500. Now in going to 3,500, you might want to sit down, clearly and be like, okay, what is it like in this introduction? What is the information here that if I take it off, it is not going to affect, the information I'm providing. And one possible approach to also do that is, which I learned recently from my advisor, is have you ever tried printing out your manuscript? Like when you think you are done, now print it out. Now go to a library or a very cool place that is different from what you have written the paper. Sit down with your pen and try to read. You will be, you will marvel at how much improvement you can actually get from that process. So that's one approach I would, kind of recommend, like print it out. Now try to use your pen. When you do it on the system, you easily delete easily, although you can also use the review pen. But when you print it out, cross out some things and try to read and see if it flows. If it doesn't flow, just find a way to connect that, that area. You understand? It's not something that is going to be easy, trust me. But with constant, practice, then it becomes better. And one thing I've noticed is that my advisor is very good in this. I mean, virtually all the advisors I've worked with, and one thing I can say is that they also achieve this through years of experience. Not that there's any magic in it, because the moment you start doing it, then when you also, help in reviewing other people's manuscripts, very much, it will really become something that is, relatively easier to achieve because you will have been able to help other people to streamline their own work. Then, inviting other people to do it also is not a bad idea, like your colleague and be like, I know we've, done this in the past, you and I, myself. You understand? So that's not also a bad idea. But if you want to put all the pressure on yourself, sometimes the weight might be too much. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, sir. I hope Dr. Tunde is satisfied with your response. So let me move to Mr. Yusuf Kewiyemi for his question. Over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jimoh. Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. It's indeed very insightful. I would just like to get your opinion about these high impact factor journals. Particularly my field of study is food science and technology. And what I've noticed in the recent past is that most of these high impact factor journals are usually outside Africa. So in a way, of course, it's good to publish in high impact factor journals, but we realize that all our resources in getting the research done, we are at the end of the day getting it out of the Africa continent, submitting it to this high impact factor journal, possibly for promotion, for to be well recognized and the likes. So I just want to seek your opinion about how well can we also make a culture of high impact factor journals that originate from Africa and not necessarily outside the border of Africa in a way. Thank you very much.
That's a very good and insightful question, actually. But I think it has to do with our intentionality. Because one of the things we see in this so-called high impact factor is that they have standard that they maintain. And they, try to uphold us, that standard, at least almost all the time. So if we want to have our impact factors that emanates from Africa too, we need to, be intentional about it. Intentional about it in the sense that once we set the standard that this is the standard, we should not compromise it, irrespective of whoever is the person, even if it is the most highly sought professor in the continent that has submitted the paper. And I think that is one of the reasons why this double-blind peer review of a thing was introduced. Like, for example, if you don't see, the name of the author or the name of, the reviewer, then it is expected that you'll be able to do a very good job. However, it doesn't mean we do not have any journal you can say is a very good journal or impact. At least I know Nigerian Journal of Food Science or something. I don't know the name of the journal clearly, but I know it's published by Elsevier. And for them to be able to maintain the standard of Elsevier implies that, they are doing a great job. So that's probably a good start. Then the other thing is that we ourselves as academia too should, probably, think about how can we, come up with our own journals too that would really be of very high standard. Yes, I do agree with you, honestly, but there is a trade-off because if you decide to put your work in, all your work in all our local journals, then visibility is impaired. Nobody's going to see your work. You understand? Although I think Ajol is trying in that direction now, trying to, host some of these journals. But I think it's high time we also, kind of think inward and be like, okay, how do we come up with this idea? Then we probably also need some kind of investment, in this regard. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Just a comment. To okay. There's a comment from Olanrewaju which says, "Thanks for the presentation. Prior to the submission, I was once advised to write the editor to check for suitability. Here I attach the abstract. Is it right and helpful? Need your take as an editor."
It's the right thing to do. There's nothing bad in that, but you need to know that it's not a guarantee that your work is going to be accepted. You know, like I shared one of my experience recently. We, reach out to the journal. It's called pre-submission inquiry. So we reach out to the journal, be like, okay, we are planning to submit this work. This is our abstract. This is what we have done. And they were like, okay, fine, we should submit. But after submitting, they still, kind of desk reject it. So it's not like it's what is it called? It's a like like a pass that is going to be accepted. And I also have a positive experience in another instance. The BMC paper is recently showed that has almost like 246 authors. It's also a pre-registered report. Like we pre-register it with BMC biology, notifying them this is what we want to do, how we want to go about it, and they accept that yeah, we should go ahead, and it eventually get accepted and is published. It's making impact now. So, but doing a pre-submission inquiry, I think is becoming more common now, especially if you are trying to publish in an impact, journal. I hope that helps.
Okay. All right. Thank you. The last question for tonight coming from I don't know whether it's Dr. or Mr. Yesir A. Karim.
Okay, Assalamualaikum wabarakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam.
Okay, thank you very much for this very enlightening presentation. I have two clarifications. One is you mentioned that in social sciences, sometimes they combine results along with discussion.
Yeah.
Let me say, I think I was reading a paper. I'm a clinician, so I was reading a paper from School of Public Health, a particular university, and they did the same thing. For me, I know that in public health and medicine generally, we usually separate our results and actually I have to separate their results and discussion. So I want to really know how that can be done so that in case one gets it subsequently, one may know whether it falls in line or not. Then secondly is on what counts. So I want to get this clarification of that. When we say what count, maybe for an abstract, for example, is it inclusive of the title, the corresponding author, and all that, or is just the abstract alone? Similarly, for a full manuscript too, does the reference and the initial part of the journal before the main article, are they part of the word count, or it is just solely from introduction to the discussion? And thank you very much.
Yeah, concerning the first question about combining results and discussion, I think that is highly field specific. I specifically mentioned that because my PhD actually involved some level of social sciences and I needed to publish that work. And it was like a hell for me, getting that paper published because they have to ask me to go and do some things that is peculiar to social science. But that is when I was able to learn that, they actually, kind of combine it in that field. However, there could also be some kind of paradigm shift. Everything is, can change anytime. So it may be that in a particular field, they normally write result and discussion separately, but maybe they are trying to, shift the paradigm now. And, the new trend is like, okay, now you can combine result and discussion if you like. So it depends. But if you are serving as a reviewer, you probably want to check with, the journal, to see whether they accept that or not, because the authors are expected to follow the journal, guideline. So if they are not following the journal guideline, then you are absolutely right by pointing them to that direction that no, you don't have to combine this, you have to separate it. You understand? So it depends on the various field. And because public health is also aside my purview, I'm not, used to how they, kind of publish their paper, in that particular field. Now, secondly, for the number of word count, if you are referring to abstract, um, it doesn't include the title and name and affiliations. It should not include that. It should just be like your abstract should be 200 words, and the abstract is just 200 words. And I can justify this by, citing examples like when you are trying to submit your papers online, there's a particular section where you have to upload the abstract. And some of these, submission platforms have the automatic word count above or below that box. And once you paste your abstract, it is going to, count it for you. And it also shows the maximum number of character or words that is expected of you. So I'm very sure about that one. Now, concerning the full manuscript length, I do not have total clarity on that to say whether it will include the references or not. But what I can say is that it's possible that in some journals they probably include the references. In some journals they probably don't include the references, and that's also a way where one have to look at the author guidelines to see specifically what does this include. And if one is in doubt, I don't think it's a problem if one would just shoot a very short email to the editor-in-chief asking for clarification on this, so that you don't necessarily shoot yourself in the leg just because of not being clear about this information. And it's also possible that different journals would interpret this differently. So I would recommend reaching out to the journal and be like, hey, does this include references or it doesn't include references? I believe they should be able to answer that in a straightforward manner that would be helpful, for whoever needs the information as an author. Thank you. Yeah, but if you also have clarification to add, or if you have comment to add to this, please feel free to, kind of type in and probably add your comments.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much, everyone who have joined us for today's webinar. I would like to appreciate Dr. Saheed for sharing his thoughts, insights, and expertise. And if you have any other question or you'd like to do follow-up, please follow Mira on LinkedIn, and you can also drop your number in the chat box. Before I invite Dr. Zainab to close it out for tonight, I just want to urge every one of us that we should kindly use our social media handles, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, or all the platforms to publicize the knowledge values that we have gained from this webinar. This will surely help more people to benefit from our subsequent presentation. It is on that note I would like to invite Dr. Zainab Yakub to wrap up this session. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Firstly, I would like to say big jazakallah khairan to Dr. Jimoh. Thank you very much for this very insightful lecture. Personally, I've been able to pick more than 2 things from here, which inshallah I would adopt when I'm trying to publish my current journals and future journals. Thank you, Rahim, for hosting today's webinar. And like Rahim said before, this webinar is a monthly webinar, so you can check our LinkedIn page for our monthly webinar for information on the next topic and when it will be. It's every Sunday, last Sunday of every month, 7:30 p.m. Nigerian time. And LinkedIn page and WhatsApp, we inform everyone and we try to remind everyone. And just like Rahim said, you can share the knowledge that you've gained here to other people, and you can also um, check our YouTube page and post it on page for our previous videos and also this video, so you can share with other people also. And Jazakallah everyone for attending today's webinar, and I hope to see you inshallah next month for an upcoming webinar.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure hosting this session today. Until when next we meet, I remain myself. Rahim Olatunji is my name. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you, Ms. Dr. Saheed, once again. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Good night, everybody. Assalamu alaikum wa